So this is part one of our discussion on practice ACT problems. I call it 7 in 8 because your goal is to get through 7 problems in 8 minutes, which is similar to the time frame you'd want to have on the actual ACT. I'll talk about specific strategy more at a different time. For right now though, if you are just going for a typical, you want to get just a nice average score, maybe low 20s, high teens, your goal should be that you want to try to get through the first 6 problems that I put in these in the 8 minutes you have. So spend a little longer and try to do your best on the first 6. If you're wanting to get a really high score though, mid to high 20s, even in the 30s, you should be trying to get through all 7 of these problems and even have a tiny bit of time to spare with the time given to you. So anyway, I'm just going to kind of go through our problems right now, one at a time. And the first 3 are problems that I would consider to be problems you want to make sure you get right. They're very, given your skill set, they're very doable. And it's the sort of thing that you want to make sure you get the right answer on. You don't want to throw away points because you made a silly mistake. Anyway, on our first question here, we have a point. And you could go ahead and you could write down, you could plot that point. And that would be totally fine. But I'm going to show you a different way. So the most logical way would be to plot your points, count up 4, left 10, find your new coordinates and be done with it. If we are going up 4 units though, that's going to affect my y. If I'm at -7 and I go up 4, my new y is going to be at -3. And if I go left 10, if I'm at a +4 and I go left 10, that would take me all the way to -6. The big thing that might mess you up on this problem is the fact that they put the up first and left second. They did that intentionally to mess you up. Just as long as you keep that straight, the correct answer is -6, -3, which is choice D. On our second problem here, the one with parallelogram, if they're talking about a parallelogram or something in geometry, you should draw a picture if they don't give it to you. Parallelogram, 2 sets of parallel sides. And remember when you're labeling a parallelogram, you take the letters and you kind of have to go in a consecutive circle with them, one way or the other. So if I call this W, X, Y, Z, notice how the letters go in a continuous circle like that. I couldn't go W, X, Y, Z like all over the place like that. So anyway, I have my picture labeled. W and Y are congruent, which makes sense. Opposite angles in a parallelogram are the same. And these 2 angles also have to be the same. In a parallelogram, both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. And I know that X is 112. I want to find angle Y right here. And if you recall from your geometry days, consecutive angles in a parallelogram, that is angles that are next to each other, are supplementary. So they have to add up to 180. So I would just do a quick 112 plus X equals 180. And if you solve that, you're going to end up with X equals 68 degrees, which is going to be choice G. On the third problem here, for those of you who have had me in class, you know already, my favorite way to talk about percent problems is using a handy little formula, A equals R times B. A is your after, B is your before, R is your rate, and your rate goes in as a decimal. So the price is going from $500 to $650. The 500 is before the increase, so I'm going to put it over here for B. The 650 is what the price was afterwards. And the R, the rate, we don't know. This is just a little problem now, little algebra problem we solve. We divide both sides by 500. And when we divide both sides by 500, we're going to get 1.3, which if I want to turn that back into a percent, that is 130%. You move your decimal 2 spots to the right here to turn it into a percent. Well, if that just said what percent we'd be done, it said what is the percent increase though? Or the percent, by what percent did the price increase? Well, remember, if something doesn't change, it's still at 100%. If we're up to 130%, that means we went up 30%. This problem marks the start of what I consider the medium problems. Medium problems are ones that aren't immediately obvious what the answer is going to be. They'll require some work, but they are within your capabilities and they are doable. So it's something that you definitely want to make sure you're getting right, even if it takes you a little while to come up with it. So they give us this bizarre new operation given by a club symbol. And they say that Wx club yz, y comma z, is equal to this thing right here. Then they tell you what W is, they tell you what X is, they tell you what Y is, they tell you what Z is. This is kind of a weird setup for a problem, and this is just like a made up symbol here. But doing the problem is just really plugging stuff into parentheses. So the first parenthesis was supposed to be WZ, starting there. Well, that's 3 times 0, because W times Z, there's W, there's Z. That's going to be 0 minus Y times X. Y is a 5, and X is a 2. Y times X is going to be a 10. So this parenthesis here, WZ was 0, Y times X was 10, and then I'm going to get a negative 10 from that parenthesis. On my second one, I have W times X. That would be this times this, so 3 times 2 is 6, plus Y times Z. 5 times 0 is 0. So it's really a negative 10 times a positive 6, which is a negative 60, which is going to be choice G on that one. So our next problem is talking about something called a geometric sequence, which you may or may not already know what that is. But even if you don't, just look at the pattern in the numbers and see what's going on here. How do we get from one number to the next? And when you see a pattern problem like this, my first instinct is always, I'm going to look into the adding pattern. So this is a plus 5, then we had a plus 7.5, then we got a plus 11.25. It's not immediately obvious what that is. So it's not like it's going up by the same amount, you're going up by a certain pattern. So what you should try next is looking at multiplying. And the best way to do that is to take a number and to divide it by the one before it. For example, if I do 15 divided by 10, that's going to be a 1.5. If I do 22.5 divided by 15, that is also going to be a 1.5. And it's going to keep going like that. 33.75 divided by 22.5 is a 1.5. So what's happening is we're multiplying by 1.5 to go this way in our pattern. They're asking for the fifth term. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. I just have to multiply by 1.5 one more time. And I'm going to get 50.625 when I do that, which is choice B. A geometric sequence, just for your own benefit here, is actually a sequence where you multiply by the same number over and over. Arithmetic sequence is what it's called when you add by the same number. Next up, we have a slightly more involved parallelogram problem. I know it's a parallelogram because these angles are the same and so are these, which means that my opposite sides have to be the same. So if this is a 15, so is this one. And if this is a 10, so is this one. It's always good to just fill in information. I haven't even read the problem yet, but based on those pieces right there, I know that the sides I filled in are correct. They want to find VZ, so I'm going to put an X on this. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to figure out a way to work this triangle right here. I have a little right triangle. Now, if I knew this side over here, side WV, I could just do Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Unfortunately for me, that's not an option because I don't know this side. And there's no way of getting that right now. But what I can do is look at these angles right here. Those two angles are supplementary, angle WZY and WZV. So they have to add up to 180. If this is a 145, that makes this guy a 35 right there. Well, now I can actually use my SOHCAHTOA, my trig functions back that I learned in geometry, and again if you had me in Algebra 2. So I'm going to circle my angle. The sides I care about are A and H, and I don't care about the O. So if it's A and H, I'm going to use cosine. So I'm going to do cosine of my angle, cosine 35, equals A over H, so x over 10. And they want just x by itself. I'm going to multiply both sides by 10. You don't even have to get it as a decimal. It's just going to be 10 times cosine of 35, which should match choice C on your answers. Now, if you're super observant here, you'll see that when I did this problem, my answer choices right now are different. I realized halfway through this problem that the book had a typo. The correct answer actually isn't on the choices you see here, but on your worksheet, the correct answer is C, 10 times cosine of 35. So this takes us to our last problem, which is the toughest problem out of the 7. This is a question that the majority of you guys are probably not going to want to mess with. If you're looking for that score in the mid to high 20s, or you're looking for in the 30s, this is a problem that you can tackle and you can get right. But if your goal is like 21, somewhere in that area, 21 or below, I would say, I wouldn't even worry about this. I would spend your time making sure you're getting the essentials correct, because this is a tricky question. So anyway, we want to know out of x, y, and z, which of these numbers must be less than 0 if this is true. So I have x to the third, y to the fourth, z to the sixth is less than 0. So if it's less than 0, that's another way of saying it's negative. So we're basically looking for, if they're less than 0, out of x, y, and z, which ones have to be negative. So I have x to the third, y to the fourth, z to the sixth, and when I multiply all that stuff together, I'm going to get something that's negative, less than 0. Well, y to the fourth power is always going to be a positive number. I have no idea about y itself, but this middle piece right here, y to the fourth, is always a positive. Who cares if y is positive or negative? When you multiply the same thing 4 times, if you take it to an even power, you're going to get a positive answer. Same deal with z to the sixth. No matter what, this is going to be positive. If you multiply 6 of the same thing together, you're always going to get a positive answer. Well, if my thing right here is less than 0, the only way that can be true is if this guy is a negative, because these are both have to be positive. So this part has to be negative. So x to the third has to be negative. Well, the only way that's true is if x itself is negative. Because if x was really a positive number, a positive times a positive times a positive, we're not going to get a negative answer. So x has to be negative. That's basically what this piece right here was telling me. Now I know that. They ask me which of these things here, which of my answers, have to be negative. Okay? We have no idea about y and z by themselves. Y could be a positive number, y could be a negative number, z could be positive, z could be negative. I have no idea. All I know is it didn't matter because I got positives in this situation. But like this y right here, we have no idea. It could be positive, it could be negative. So I know x is negative. I have no idea about y. We want to know which of these pieces must be less than 0. Well, if you look at the y right here, I don't know what that is. If it's a positive, sure, I get some negative answer. If y ends up being negative, that'll be positive. This doesn't have to be less than 0. It's all dependent on y. For my next choice here, remember x has to be negative. Y squared though, I don't know what y is, but if I square y, I'm definitely getting out a positive. That's got to be true no matter what y actually is. Well, a negative times a positive is always going to be a negative. The correct answer there is G. Same thing here, I have no idea what y and z are, so I can't say for sure about this one. If I don't know what y and z are, just because x is negative doesn't mean this whole thing has to be negative. That's not true. And this is going to make a positive, don't know, can't say for sure. The only option there is G, because if y squared is automatically be positive, x is negative, that gives you a negative answer.